Good evening and welcome to this evening's SciFest Africa webinar, presented by Parthy Chetty, Executive Director of Eskom Expo for Young Scientists. I'm your host, Stephen Lang. The topic for this evening's presentation is Harnessing the Innovation of the Youth through Expo for Young Scientists, the Logical Road to Success. The webinar will start with Mr. Chetty, who will give a presentation of about 30 minutes. After that, we will have a question and answer session where participants can write in their questions on the Q&A button. Or if you're watching on Facebook, you can write your comments on the SciFest Africa page. And I will put the questions to Mr. Chetty. So if you have any thoughts about what he's saying, write them down before you forget. The presentation will discuss how young people need to acquire new and modern skills to survive in a world that is still evolving. These skills need to support innovation, and we explain how Expo stimulates and develops these through inquiry and research. We also touch on developing the essential 21st century skills to prepare our learners to survive in this world. Creativity is not sufficiently emphasized at school. You are either an art student, low status, or a science student, and that's where the nerds come in. The key to innovation is creativity. That has to be stimulated while our children are still young and more flexible so they can better respond to learning opportunities. The concept of STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, is discussed in the context of innovation and creativity. The presentation goes further to encourage the youth into STEAM-related studies and careers, and also addresses the role of teachers and mentors in this learning process. It takes a village to raise a child, and we expand on how this old saying is relevant to our current learners as we prepare them to make South Africa globally competitive. And now it's over to you, Mr. Chetty.
Thank you, Stephen. I really appreciate the opportunity. And to SciFest, I'm going to start sharing my screen shortly. Confirm that you can see it. Screen 2. Okay, so I've decided to talk about, and there's some motivation behind the topic that I've chosen. My topic is talking about the innovation of the youth through Expo for Young Scientists, and Expo is one of the avenues we could look at, and why is it the logical road for success? I'd also like to contextualize the value of innovation. A few years ago, Professor Ian Jandal and myself were invited to a STEM conference in Jerusalem, Israel, to talk about STEM and innovation. And we were representing Africa at the conference. And why it's also important, I'm bringing this up, is because Israel has got the second largest number of startups in the world for a very, very small population. And they are really challenged because they are not getting sufficient learners into STEM careers. They're not turning out the scientists and engineers that we would really require to keep the country going. So a country like Israel is, in a sense, starting to panic. So we in South Africa are looking at their example and looking at such high-flying caliber of innovation coming out of Israel. We see a similar thing coming out of Germany, whereby they're also inviting learners to come and study free in Germany and only in the engineering fields. And Germany is one of the world leaders in engineering and products. So I just thought it's really important that we start looking at innovation in the South African context And let's prepare long-term. Education is a long-term investment. It is not something we can achieve in a few years. So I'm hoping to encourage the viewers to actually take this seriously, and especially with the younger generation who still have educational career in front of them. We start by looking at the status of South African schools. We still have schools that exist in semi-rural parts of the country, just outside of the big cities, that look like this. And we also have schools that look like a palace, also in South Africa in 2021, a few decades after we have our freedom. Now, this is important in the context of my presentation. We look at playing facilities, sports fields. Again, this is a current photograph of a typical township school, which is just on the outskirts of any of the big cities. And of course, in any of the quintile 4, quintile 5 schools and private schools, you would have surfaces and facilities like this. And these coexist in the same education system that we are all trying to work with. Let's look at the classroom. What does a South African classroom look like? The classroom on the left is an average classroom you'd find in one of the non-fee paying schools. We classify them as quintile 1, 2, and 3. Typically, they're normally overcrowded and lacking educational stimulation with bare windows, bare walls, not much space for resource stimulation. And the classroom on the right is an average classroom from a quintile 4, a quintile 5 school. And notice a stark difference in the environment, including the overhead data projector, lots of stimulation in the classroom, very little overcrowding. So this is still a current classroom in South Africa. So we have both of these that are still in existence. Now let's look at, when we talk about STEM education, let's look at some of the labs that we would see. On the left, this is an average township school whereby maybe because of lack of resources and material, the teacher tends to do the experiment and the learners are all observers. They simply watch. They just look at science being done. And on the right-hand side, we have an average quintile 4 school in one of the suburbs, where learners have their own work surfaces. There is place for collaboration, and each one can work at their own pace and do science. Now, the main difference between these two photographs is here our learners are observing, here our learners are doing science. Now, this is one of the mottos of the founder of the Expo for Young Scientists, the late Dr. Derek Gray. He founded Expo because he wanted learners to do science. And this is what we're going to focus on, and how we're going to change the status quo and how we're going to change South Africa into innovators and being competitive. Now let's look at technology in the classroom. Now on the left, we find we have a classroom with a whiteboard technology, or it could be an LCD screen. But notice as well that all the learners are still observing. So the whiteboard, which is supposed to be an interactive whiteboard, simply replaces the green. It does have value. It does show. It does show multimedia. It has sound. It can show animation. It's really great. But in the light of the type of education we are moving towards, this is still a teacher-centered environment where the teacher holds the knowledge. So in a sense, this is still part of the old style of teaching. Now, on the right, we have learners who have access to a computer lab. They attend an IT class, maybe once a week. They pick up skills in isolation, and I'll cover this a little later. So they're taught specific computer skills, how to use a word processor, how to use PowerPoint. And these are skills. And basically, if these skills are not applied within 28 days, they are lost. So skills need to be taught in an integrated way. And I'll talk a little about that later in the presentation. So again, we have technology in the classroom, but this is just a lab where you simply have minimal contact time and a specific time slice in the day. And again, this is not the ideal that we would like to see. Now let's move on to what the 21st century learner should be doing, or what the classroom should look like. Here we have decentralized IT in a classroom. It looks like most learners have their own laptop. The image on the right is from a South African school. Learners are probably using a small tablet or even cell phones, but the learners are still using decentralized technology, and the learning is self-paced, self-centered, and they are not focusing on the teacher as the locus in the classroom. Both of these have the same impact. The learners work at their own pace. And this is what we need to see happening more in our South African schools. And this is just a build up to where we need to be. Now, in the next few slides, I'm going to do a few introductions. Here we have a South African learner, and she did participate in Expo for young scientists a few years ago, in 2002 to be correct, at the age of 16. With her Expo project, Claire Reid represented South Africa at the International Stockholm competition, where she won the junior prize. And that's the last that South Africa has ever won at Stockholm. Claire went on to win the Women in Water for Scientific Innovation, and this was awarded by ex-President Thabo Mbeki. She was a winner of the SAB Foundation Social Innovation Awards. She was the EMEA winner, which is Europe, Middle East, and Africa, winner of the Global Social Venture Competition. She also spoke alongside Sir Richard Branson in London, and she was a closing speaker alongside Bill Gates in Washington. Now we're going to come back to why this is relevant. The next person I'd like to introduce, and to many he may not be a stranger, Sia Cruza. Here he is interacting with Michelle Obama, the ex-First Lady of the US. On the right-hand side, he is showcasing his project at Intel ISEF in the USA. He represented South Africa at ISEF in 2007, where he went on to win gold and best of category. And he even has a planet named after him. How cool is that? He went on to win a Harvard scholarship because he was visible in the USA. He did some research at NASA for quite a while, and he even attended a rocket launch, one of his dreams come true. He received the Order of Mapungubwe from the President of South Africa, which is a highly esteemed award. He is the founder and managing director of Galactic Energy Ventures, which is focused on the energy needs of emerging markets like South Africa. He is the youngest member of the Africa 2.0 Energy Advisory Panel. And I'm going to quote Sia. He says, "I am an example of what happens when you give young South Africans opportunities." Sia grew up in the Eastern Cape, not far from where Grahamstown is, closer to Mthatha. He finished his schooling in Johannesburg, but he is a child of the Eastern Cape. He was motivated by what he saw in the Eastern Cape, and that was the foundation for his education in the Eastern Cape. And he's gone on to make not only a name for himself, but even put South Africa on the map, because he had the recognition of Michelle Obama. And I'm going to close on Sia's slide with a quotation from Michelle Obama. And she stated, "You see Sia and President Obama and so many others in South Africa and the United States. They are living proof of what the legendary South African President Mandela said. He said, education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. Absolutely profound words. And the fact that Michelle Obama is also echoing those sentiments really holds South Africa in very high esteem. But can we deliver on promises of those that have passed before us and those that have paved the way for us? And in my last introduction, I'm going to introduce you to Kiara Ngan. In 2015, at the age of 16, she developed a solution to combating drought with a low-cost, biodegradable, super-absorbent polymer made out of orange peels. Her Expo project was also entered in the Google Science Fair, where she won the Community Impact Award. It was about 600,000 rands at the time. She went on to win a book deal. She delivered a TED Talk. She was featured in both Cosmopolitan, South Africa's 19 Under 19 Roundup, as well as the new wave of disruptors in Forbes. Since 2018, she has attended the prestigious Stanford University as an undergraduate. In 2019, she spoke at the United Nations headquarters on International Women's Day. Kiara goes on to quote, "If the cure to cancer is in a young girl's mind, if she doesn't have the opportunity to learn STEM, we're not going to get the solution. We need to give girls the necessary resources to create change." Now, this is coming from a 16-year-old. And why these are all relevant is because I'm going to share what made them different to the average South African learner. And this is what made them different. They took what they learned in the classroom, and with a little bit of innovation, they were able to make the mark on the international stage, not just South Africa. They started in a classroom in South Africa, every one of them. And there are a lot more learners like these three, but I've just quoted a few examples that have gone on to really make South Africa proud. By the way, Mark Shuttleworth was also an Expo participant many years ago, and we all know the reputation that he's created for South Africa and became a billionaire in his own right. So my focus on the talk today is on innovation and why innovation is important in our education in the South African context. Innovation is the process and also the outcome of creating something new, which is also of value. South Africa and Africa are a consumer economy. We just consume what is sold to us. It's about time that Africans need to be creators, innovators, and disruptors in order to make Africa and South Africa globally competitive. Those three examples that I shared with you proves we can do it. We now need to harness what they've done, harness that innovation, and channel it in a way that makes us competitive. Now, this is an important inflection point in the life of young learners at school, where we need to stimulate and support the young learners' inquisitive minds, and matched with their natural playfulness, it results in innovation from a different perspective to that of us adults. We adults are set in our ways. We don't want to change. We're sitting from a perspective, but these youngsters, they're not scared to challenge the norms, and that is why we need to support them. Now, the source for innovation, there's basically two sources that we have. The first being, it could be a dream of someone, it could be an inspiration, and it could be a yearning discovery that one would make. And secondly, it could be a problem that we need to resolve, or a challenge. And most recently, the worldwide problem was the COVID-19 virus epidemic that we all had to solve. Now, these young minds are not fearful of outrageous claims and out of the world thinking, which is what makes their perspective so refreshing for us adults. These young scientists, they need to be groomed to solve problems of the future, which don't yet exist. They're going to use technologies that still need to be created. And we are the ones that need to give them these skills. Now, the basis of innovation, where does it start? Innovation is, in a sense, it's about creativity. It starts with an idea. Everybody has ideas, but not many of us take those ideas and put it down into something tangible. So creativity is the act of channeling the imagination into something concrete. It may result in an invention, which is the physical creation of a new concept or an idea. And eventually that leads to innovation, which is the successful exploitation of new ideas. Some of these innovative minds will also go on to start their own small businesses using the science project as a basis for future development and refinement, and go on to create a successful business venture. Now, the first example I chatted about, Claire Reed, she started her business called Real Farming because she did a project on planting seeds for her grade 10 Expo project. And she realized there was an opportunity in the market. She now has a successful business marketing real farming. Now, our world will need many scientists and engineers with strong research capabilities in order to solve the problems of the future, which we don't know exactly what they are. As was the case when many scientists around the world came together and collaborated and developed a vaccine for the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, these scientists had to apply their scientific knowledge because it never existed in the past, but they had to apply their knowledge to the task at hand. And because they had a strong background in research and development, they were able to develop a vaccine. Now, this is what we need to focus on and start harnessing this. Now, let's look at the status of our school subjects. In our school environment, we have silos of subjects: mathematics, English, science, social sciences. We are all taught in these silos. And this is not going to help us going forward. It's relevant, but we need to see how do we apply this. We need to transform what we are learning in the classroom to something more tangible. And this is what leads to STEAM education, using science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. Now, strange enough, you'll wonder, why does the arts creep in? Because arts is the creative side. And I'm going to touch a little bit later on that. Now, when we put all of these together, all these different disciplines, it builds up into some form of success. Now, what would that success be? By integrating all that we learn in the classroom and presenting it in its final format, we can produce a science project, a science expo, which worldwide is what is being done. Now, in the USA, for example, learners need to take their science project into university. When they're applying for university place, they've got to show something that they're bringing as an entry level. In some universities in the US, they also insist that the undergraduates adopt a school or they mentor a learner. And this is another important point I'm going to expand on later in the presentation. So this is what we need to do. We need to transform the way we are thinking about our silos of education. Stephen mentioned it takes a village to raise a child, and it's an old saying. Now, this is what we need to do. We need to use a village to raise a child. And how do we do that? We bring different components together. These different components, one of them is the school. We have a language teacher who will focus on reading. And this is where a learner does a literature review for an expo or a research project. They'll need to write reports. They'll need to present their findings in a written document. They'll need to communicate using audio and visual means. We normally have a speech session or something like that. So the language teachers play a key role, even though they're not teaching the learner the actual science. Then, for example, a mathematics teacher, they will teach the learner about data analysis, how to analyze what they've collected, how to do calculations and predictions, how to present data that they've collected onto graphs. And these can be used in any subject that the learner is doing their research on. All subject teachers, we have many categories. All subject teachers will look at specific content that they teach, whether it's social science, whether it's physical science, whether it's physical education for that matter. And the teacher would also act as a mentor. So the school environment is one key component to being part of that village of raising a child. The second is the broader STEM community, and I kind of put it together. So we would have mentors who come from various sectors. A mentor is somebody who has content expertise. For example, if a teacher is not very familiar with nuclear physics, she would refer the learner to a mentor who has some content expertise on nuclear physics to help that learner with their project. And this is how many of our learners compete and do exceptionally well. And I'll touch a bit on that later as well. We talk about a mentor being available to the learner. We also talk about employment opportunities that mentors could provide for the learner. So if I'm working for Expo for Young Scientists and I'm mentoring a learner, and if I am hiring in the near future, I know that this learner has got the skill set that my organization needs, and I will be able to absorb that learning in my organization. We also look at private sector, very broad. Here we recruit judges, industry experts who have content expertise. They also provide financial capabilities for science fairs, for learners. They provide platforms. For example, some of them co-host in SciFest. They will co-host the Expo for Young Scientists in the Grahamstown region as one of the examples. We see a lot of success coming out of private sector providing platforms for these learners. They provide bursaries. They provide awards. It could be cash. It even could be in kind. They could provide internships or learnerships. So there's various roles that private sector plays in contributing to raising the child in this community. We then have universities. We work with every university in the country, and universities have, again, a key role. Now, universities provide venues, they provide judges, mentors, lab facilities, bursaries, they provide STEM workshops. Now it's a win-win because universities as well also need to provide, or they need to produce postgraduates up to PhD level. And it starts with learners who engage in research at an early age. And when learners do research at an early age, they develop a passion. So they don't just get a degree and get a job. They pursue their studies further. So universities are absolutely interested in the caliber of learners that come through any of these science activities. Our science centers, we have numerous science centers across the country. All of them play a vital role in the STEM community and to raise a child in the village. And last but not least is government. Now, government has adopted, for example, the Expo for Young Scientists as one of the examples, as a national initiative. Government creates an enabling environment. They create policy for these activities to proceed and to thrive. Government provides resources. We have an organization like SASTA who provide interns to various organizations across the country. They provide funding opportunities. We also work with Technology Innovation Agency. Again, they provide opportunities, it's funding, it's workshops, it's legal advice and support for learners to take or to register an intellectual property, to take their product to market, provide them with a monthly stipend to work on the project. So all of these initiatives come together as a village to raise a child. So this is a concept that's really important for us to now have success in the STEM environment. Now, this is important about why is arts important to innovation? Why is understanding of innovation important? Our right brain is the creative part of us, and the left brain is very scientific. We need to bring these two together because a better understanding of innovation will allow our learners to be better inventors of high quality projects, initiatives, inventions, and projects that have a greater potential of turning into innovation in real life. And we've seen many of that happen. It could be short term, it could happen in the next 3 to 5 years, but it will happen. We also see something that can bring value to our country, and we need to nurture, for which we can showcase around the world. We want the creative mind of the right brain to influence the left, to have a balance in life skills and in new original thoughts. Because the traditional thinking, as I mentioned earlier, and tools are no longer feasible to solve today's world problems. And a fresh creative mindset will help solve problems in truly new ways. We have to create futuristic learners who will be our problem solvers for the future. So we need to invest in our future right now. I made a reference to 21st century skills. Now, there's various skills that we see on the screen, like critical thinking, communication, creativity, information and media literacy, social responsibility, problem solving, collaboration, self-directed learning, accountability and adaptability. All of these need to be harnessed and together form 21st century skills. Sometimes they refer to as C21. Now, these skills also focus on teamwork in the work environment. You've got to work with teams. You have a bringing together of different minds. That's probably one of the reasons why the scientists came up with a vaccine for COVID, different perspectives. Which is the main thing, which is value for money when we go out shopping. If we look at a 1 kilogram pack of sweets or a 750 gram pack of sweets, or for that matter, a 2-liter bottle of Coke compared to a 1.25 liter of Coke, which is better value for money? By simply analyzing value for money while we're standing in the supermarket, we are actually using some of these 21st century skills. We are calculating the unit cost per milliliter, which is cheaper, a 2-liter or 1.25, or a 1 kilogram or a 750 gram. So we are using these skills on a daily basis, sometimes very subtly without us knowing these things. And what needs to come out of these 21st century skills is innovation. And we're going to explore that a little further. So part of the innovation is we start learners by focusing on the scientific method. So what exactly is the scientific method? And it's a very simple image, you know. This is the scientific method. Yeah, we observe, we question, we develop a hypothesis, a prediction, we experiment, we get results. This is what goes through our mind. Now, we've been in existence for 41 years and we have a sound track record and great potential as the oldest and only national initiative serving all of South Africans. And we encourage learners to use the scientific method. Now, what you see here is probably what goes through a learner's mind when we talk about a scientific method. Produce various levels of support to ensure the success. Now, we need to help learners to declutter all of this. Now, let's see, how can we simplify this? Quite simply, this is what the scientific method is. This is what a scientist would look like. A scientist would, well, firstly, a scientist is curious. They ask questions, they form a hypothesis, they conduct experiments, they record observations, and they make conclusions. So this is what we expect of our children. So once they learn how to do research, they actually become a scientist in training. They can now start the research in any one of the 13 categories that are internationally benchmarked, and there's a whole list of them. So what is a learner's perspective of a scientist? This is a typical profile. Now let's look at, is this the only type of scientist we have? Now, not all scientists are confined to a lab coat and a laboratory. These are all examples of scientists in the field. This may be what we perceive as the typical scientist. All of these people and all of these images capture a scientist. With Expo activities, every learner is a scientist, and we help them achieve their potential. Bearing in mind the huge gap between fee-paying and non-fee-paying schools, which is linked to socioeconomic environment, resources, and the potential to be successful. So an absence of a science lab does not exclude any learner from doing a research project or an Expo project. Some of the best projects that won internationally were not pure science projects, but actually social science. So all of these, you do not need a lab to go and do this kind of research. So we want to demystify the fact that research is only done in a lab. Now, this is where our school system, in a sense, lets us down. All learners are judged by a set of criteria at a specific time in the year. What Expo has realized over the decades is that learners do excel when they pursue their passion, as outlined in the 3 Expo winners I mentioned in my introduction. What Expo has also realized that due to the inequality, now this image is telling us that, sure, if we say that all animals must climb the tree to prove a test, we know that every one of these animals will fail except for probably one. Now, we must be cognizant of the fact that every learner has a different strength. Now, in our existing system in South Africa, we also have challenges like equality and equity. What we realize is that due to the inequalities of the past, we have to share resources and support in an equitable manner, as highlighted by this image on the right. We have to learn from the past in order to influence the future. So inequality, we could simply say all 12 million learners in the country have access to a computer lab in school or have access to a library. But many of the learners are going to be here. They cannot get to the library to access the resources. What we may have to do is to provide a leg up, provide transport, or have mobile labs going out. So this is what we need to focus on as we proceed in South Africa. This is the status of our presence as well as all the science centers in the country. And this is important because we need to collaborate with all the science centers. The stars represent our 35 Expo regions, and the black dots represent all the science centers in the countries. Now, expanding on this, this is our status of all universities. And again, we need to work closely with all of these universities and science centers to start achieving what we need to set out to achieve. So how do we fare internationally? In 2019 and 2020, we sent 35 learners to participate overseas, and they returned with 24 awards. This reinforces the notion that Expo helps to create world-class scientists and innovators. They compete with the best in the world, and they win. In every continent, well, wherever we've been invited, we've participated and we've won. So our learners are capable of this. So how do we do it? How do we get these kids there? How do we win internationally? So we create a series of resources and guidelines, print and online, to help. We help all types of learners from quintile 1 schools to quintile 5 to private. One of the things we realize is that creating the rules of how to do research is not enough. We gotta go, we gotta go a little further. So a simple example, so creating a project guidebook on how to do research is like teaching somebody the rules of soccer. It does not make them Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi. But if we hold their hand and we teach them how to be an excellent soccer player, then we will produce world-class soccer players like Messi and Ronaldo. Because not everybody is at the same level. So we need to start moving from simply exposing learners to all the good things in education, but by showing them how to move towards excellence. We then develop more resources for teachers on working with learners. We then develop resources for departmental officials and curriculum advisors to facilitate learning sessions with teachers. We also realize that we need to help judges to be better judges to judge these projects, and we develop material for judges. We also realize there's a lot of volunteers out there that want to know how to run an expo region. What do we need to do? We developed a manual for them. And then we realized that a lot of this is very school centered, but we can still use a school. And how do we expand outside the school? So we developed resources to set up science clubs and a host of wonderful activities in a classroom environment that can be done. We also developed material for planning and running science camps, where we take the learners out of the classroom away for a weekend, and they do a lot of exciting scientific activities. So we need to move away from just repeating a science experiment done in school to learners being creative. So we achieve success by providing learners with a lot of resources that they need to use to be successful. Even though we have 40 years of experience behind us, we are still evolving as an organization to ensure we provide the latest strategies in innovation and enhance the quality of scientific research being done. Now, at the Expo activities, our learners, they win big awards, and again, it's through our various partnerships. Anything from a laptop to a 400,000 Rand bursary to international trips, and also a 1 million Rand scholarship to study in Germany. Now, all of these activities also have a role to play because we need to stimulate learners to actually engage. We need to give them something to look forward to. And the key thing we want to achieve at Expo is we want our learners to discover their future. And with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chetty. That was a fascinating presentation, and it raises a lot of very important issues that will make a huge difference to our country, to the future of this country. Where are we going to? So if anyone has any questions that we can put to Mr. Chetty, that would be great. But before we go, I'd like to use my chairperson's privilege and ask you a question myself. Do you think it's possible to teach creativity, innovation?
Yes, we can. Not necessarily in the classroom environment, but it's the same teachers that we rely on. We give them the skills. Creativity, in a sense, comes from within. What we try to do is, if we want people to be innovative, we got to teach some level of creativity. Now, the mere fact that all of us are not outstanding artists, the mere fact that all of us are not outstanding singers or dancers or performers, will tell us that in most cases, it is something that you are born with. But in the education system, we can't just accept that and step away to say, listen, I was not born creative. What we're trying to do is say, yes, we know that it's a natural, innate ability, but there are things that we can do to stimulate some level of creativity. I hope that answers that, Stephen.
To stimulate the creativity, not really teach it. And also an interesting thing that you said is that you need innovators and disruptors. And disruptors, it's an interesting term, because very often children at school who disrupt are considered naughty children. You're disrupting my class. Is this a contradiction?
Certainly not. When we talk about disruptors, it's about your inventions and your innovations need to be disruptive. To give you a good example, if we look at cell phone technology, it was disruptive. We are used to the corded phone. Now the cell phone is everywhere. The cell phone also takes over various things. It takes over your computer, your planner, all of these things. Your cell phone will tell you, it'll beep to tell you have a meeting now. And in the past, you will actually plan accordingly, read your diary, and pick up that you have a meeting, you'll attend to that shortly. So there's certain things that were disruptive, but we accommodate that in our lives. It actually shapes the way we run our lives as well. Because what also came out with the cell phone is linked to the smart watch that some people have. The smart watch tells you how many more steps you need to do in the day. It tells you your heart rate is not high enough or it's too low, whatever the case is. Your smartwatch starts dictating to you how to run your life on a day-to-day basis. But we accept these things. So being disruptive is about the technology, how it shapes our lives, but not the disruptive child in the class. Because as a school teacher, the last thing we want is that kind of disruptive child in our classroom.
I see. That's interesting. We're not getting any questions from our viewers, so I can take advantage of asking another question, if you don't mind, Mr. Chetty. If you can just give us a little bit of a background to Science Expo, how it has a kind of a mandate, I suppose, from government to create an environment where innovation is encouraged, is stimulated. Do you feel, after I don't know how many years that you've been doing this, that we're going in the right direction? Are we making progress? Are we creating an environment where science is actually encouraged and it's not just left for the nerds?
So absolutely, we are on the right track. We have a huge disparity in our education system, which we are addressing on an annual basis. We've been running for 41 years. It evolved. What started as a science fair evolved into a national initiative where two ministers realized that there is something that the Expo is achieving that we need to support. And we coexist with the schooling system. We are not in competition. So the Minister of Basic Education and the Minister of Science and Innovation have both come together and put their money where their mouth is. They even sit on the board of Expo. Now, in many countries, this is the norm. There is an entity, an organization that drives science fairs and innovation. The most progressive countries have it. By the way, in Africa, the oldest science fair, like Expo, is about 55 years old, and it's in Kenya. So it started a long time ago. It's not something new. And the fact that it's in existence all these years, it means that it is relevant. It is serving a purpose. The rate of our success, there's a lot more we can do. We'd like to be in many more schools. We'd like to have a lot more learners involved and engaged. The mere fact that we have learners that are entering university, that are graduating in fields that are scarce, that are getting PhDs in fields that we need, is proof that we are getting these learners from a school environment into universities to be researchers. the mere fact that our learners are competing internationally and winning means that we have a globally competitive environment, but it's a very small number. So we still have a lot to do in the next decade or so to try and level the playing fields and get more of our learners engaged in research activities.
One other question on the issue of heroes. Most South Africans, most people have heroes, but most of these heroes are either in they're either in sports or politics or business. They're very rich. We don't have many science heroes. There are exceptions, and they do well, but basically we don't have science heroes.
Stephen, I think the past year has taught us something. During the COVID pandemic, none of us were yearning to see Ronaldo on the soccer field, or none of us were yearning to see a cricket match or a rugby match, or none of us were yearning to go to the movies or go to the theater. What were we all yearning for is safety, health, and protection from the pandemic. And who did we turn to? We turned to our scientists. I think that's a huge learning curve for us all. Our scientists and our teachers are not overpaid like these performers. What a soccer player earns in 1 week is the budget of probably an entire household in this country for an entire year. So our rock stars, our focus is wrong. I think we've created the hype. When I say rock stars, we always look at, all these guys as they rock, the soccer player rocks. Our rock stars are the people in white coats, are the people collecting samples out there, analyzing and coming up with solutions. Those are our rock stars. So we need to change our mindset. Even teachers, for example, all my colleagues will say, Parthy, now I appreciate what our teachers do, because during lockdown, many parents were homeschooling, or they tried homeschooling. And I know many of them failed hopelessly. So we appreciated our teachers, we appreciated our healthcare workers, and these are all the people that are behind the scene. To give an example, if you ask any youngster to name the top 10 soccer players in the world, top 10 cricketers, they will rattle it off just like that. Even the parents, who's your favorite soccer team? Okay, they'll say, look, I'm a Liverpool supporter, and this is my 25 players in Liverpool. Then you ask that very same parent, can you name me 5 teachers that teach your child in grade 6? And I can guarantee you, they will not remember 5 teachers who make the biggest impact on their children. They will not remember them. They do not remember the healthcare workers that saved lives, that didn't go home to their children. So these are the real heroes. We're going to put a cape on all these heroes, not the performers.
I couldn't agree more. I've got a question now from one of the participants. It's from Marilyn Gibbs, who asks, with the curriculum, CAPS, being so restrictive, how will we change the mindset in education with the curriculum as it is to an integrated project-based application-based teaching pedagogy? When do you think we will get a theme-based project that spans across subjects as part of an assessment, even in the get phase, so that we drive communication, creativity, and critical thinking? This is quite a good question.
Sure. No, that's an excellent question, and I wish I have a lot more teachers and Department of Education people listening in. So one of the things our education system has to do is to provide us with a basic education, and the learner then decides on where they want to specialize, what they want to do. What we see a miscommunication in the schooling system is that if it's not prescribed in the school syllabus, then you cannot do an Expo project. That is incorrect. Project work is in the syllabus. It's there. Some grades will ask for it to be done in quarter one. Some will ask for it in the third quarter. Now, it's the creativity of the teacher. And I sat with the school, an entire team, and asked, how do you manage to integrate it? So they say the mark is only required in the third term, but they get the learners to do an Expo project from the first term, and they complete it by June to enter the regional Expo. The mark does not have to be submitted, but they can submit in the third term. And there's nothing in the school curriculum that says you cannot do an Expo project or you should not do an Expo project. There is nothing that says that. I must also flag that the most progressive schools in South Africa, an Expo project is mandatory. Take your top schools. Expo is mandatory. Now, what does that show? And the question also talks about how do we teach something that cuts across the curriculum? By doing research, certainly does that. You will need to do your desktop research. You'll need to do reading. You'll need to analyze. So you'll need comprehension skills. So your language teachers play a key role. You'll need to analyze what you've done in your experiments. Mathematics teachers, physical science, biology. You'll need to communicate your finding. So all the different learning areas or subjects in the school can be integrated simply by doing an Expo type research project from beginning to end. So it is there. There's nothing that says it cannot be done. It's all about the creativity and the resourcefulness of the teacher. And there's thousands of them out there that are producing fantastic results. Why can't the others simply say, but what is that teacher doing that they're producing such fantastic results? We have a school that produces 1,000 A aggregates, A students, 1,000 A's in one school. And we have another school that has got a 0% pass rate in matric. Ask the question, what are they doing right that I'm not doing right? So we need to share these learnings. It's out there.
Absolutely. That's a big question. And there's also, you said that there's nothing in the syllabus that says you shouldn't have a project for Science Expo, but maybe there should be something in the syllabus that says you should have a project and make it obligatory. Maybe. I could be in big trouble for that.
One of the well, that's the purpose of these webinars. Is we can be controversial, but we got to have a sound background where we can back up our arguments. For an example, yes. If we say that a science project is mandatory, it means that every school must have a science lab, and we know that's not going to happen. And that's one of the reasons why it took so long for the minister to publish norms and standards, because part of the norms and standards stated that every school must have running water and must have electricity. But we know the reality. So sometimes it's convenient to leave things out of regulations, because if government cannot do it, they cannot put it in a regulation. That's the reality. So Stephen, maybe that's the reason why it's not there. It's yours and my guess, but hey, we're entitled to make these statements.
Yeah, we could be both in trouble for that. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Parthy Chetty. With that, I'm going to close this webinar. It's been very stimulating and I've really enjoyed it. It's been really worthwhile. I'd like to remind viewers that we still have 2 more presentations in this series, both of them by NASA, the American Space Agency, where we can learn what is happening on Mars. Check it out on the SciFest Africa webpage. This webinar was put together by SciFest Africa manager, Freddie Mashati, and Gobisa Dumeko, our technical wizard, Ryan Bruton, and I'm Stephen Lang.
Thank you very much, Stephen, Ryan.